Welcome to Conservation Unfiltered, a podcast all about the North American model of conservation and your chance to dive into conversations about trends, research, and outdoor activities. It's time to get wild with the 2021 Conservation Media Award-winning host, Jason Creighton.
We had a couple encounters with bears. I think I'm a mother of two, so I know fear. I don't think I've ever been so scared where I literally can't move. So we were in Glacier, and there was a lost child, and so everybody was on the trail trying to find this child, and all of a sudden we heard somebody yelling at us, and we kind of just froze, and we're like, bear? What do you mean bear? And so we went like this, and we looked over here, and just like in the movies, it was a grizzly bear, and it was like, what, 20?
It seemed like 20 feet. It was probably more like 40 or 50 feet away, but that's still relatively close.
Welcome back to the Conservation Unfiltered podcast presented by Conserve the Wild. I'm your host, Jason Creighton, and this is episode number 153, Tips When Visiting Our National Parks. In this episode, I'm talking with Diana and John Ingles. Together, they are co-founders of a lifestyle brand called Wild Rooted. Wild Rooted is a family-owned company producing unique products like stickers, shirts printed with algae ink, and hat patches, key fobs, and keychains made with a plant-based leather alternative called MIRUM. You're going to hear more about that later. During the conversation, Diana and John provide tips for planning and packing. They recap their national park tour and give insight on which national parks are hidden gems. They also provide insight on how and why their company gives back to our national parks and forests. Let's get right into it. All right, welcome back, everyone. And as you heard in the introduction, we have Diana and John with us. We're going to talk a little bit about national parks. We're going to talk a little bit about their brand and giving back. But first, John, Diana, how are you doing? And welcome to the show.
We're doing great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, when we got connected, it was very easy for me to tell that there's a passion for the outdoors with you two sitting there. And I always enjoy talking to people that have a passion for the outdoors. And then even more so whenever they have this sort of calling to give back to the outdoors. So I'm very excited for this conversation. And, as someone, I hate to say this, I hate being the person that says I've never been to a national park. I've been to a national park, but I've never, not when it was actually a national park. So the New River Gorge in West Virginia is our newest national park. I've been there multiple times, but not since it's gotten that new designation. So as people that have visited national parks, what is your favorite national park?
Easy. Mine's Zion. How about you?
I have to say Black Hills area.
Okay.
With the Black Hills would be South Dakota, western South Dakota.
So I got to ask why for each of you. So what is it about those parks that you're like, that's my favorite, that's the one I'm drawn to?
I really, as an eco-friendly packaging designer by day, I really appreciate when you go to Zion, and other parks have this as well, but Zion really seems to have it down, to a T. When you go into the canyon, every sign for every store or every eatery has to be created in the color palette of nature so that it's not taking away from you driving into the canyon. So for me, Zion is very spiritual. As you drive in, you feel this sense of being in Mother Nature's arms. It's just very calming as soon as you drive in. And then once you're on foot and you're going up through the canyon, through the waterway, it's mind-blowing how beautiful nature is. You?
Yeah. So for me, I think this is a rigged question because it's kind of like picking your favorite child, right? The reason I picked Black Hills area, so you're talking, it has Wind Cave, Jewel Cave. It has Badlands are in that same area. A Minuteman missile silos there. We have Devil's Towers not too far away. So that whole western area of South Dakota and into Wyoming, and then down into Nebraska has 45 minutes. You have everything from caves to the mountains to the plains and the Badlands. It's just a little bit of everything there.
So you like it because there's a lot in one area.
It's super diverse. You
Right.
can get
And we drive to all the parks we go to pretty much. So a 12-hour drive in our truck is not unheard of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for us being central, yeah.
Unfortunately for me, a 12-hour drive gets me to where you are, right? And then I still have like another 12 hours to go. And I really think that is probably the biggest reason for me why I haven't been to a national park. It's just there's a great distance there. And it's funny, I hear your reasonings, and I think like it calls me back to the whole idea from like Teddy Roosevelt of having like Grand Canyon National Park. The reason why he wanted it was because he didn't want to see what happened at Niagara Falls with all the commercialization take away from the beauty of nature. So to hear that for Zion, how they're allowing, right? Because you have to have amenities for modern travelers. So to allow them, but do it in a way that it's not taken away from nature's beauty. I get that. And then, having a lot to do, I'm perfectly fine just like wandering and being on hikes. But if I'm going to go and take my wife or take my son when he gets a little bit older and can be walking around, like we need things to like grab their attention, right? Like especially my son, like we're going to need things that grab his attention. He's only going to be able to just walk next to me on a hiking trail for so long. And then he's going to be bored out of his mind unless he ends up being more like me than I realize. So that makes a ton of sense on both those parts. Now I have to ask the question of what national park is on your bucket list? What's that one that you haven't been to yet that you're thinking like, I have to get to that one?
For me, we went on a trip a few years ago where we spent 5 weeks going to 19 national parks and monuments. So we tasted each one of them. And so I'd like to go back to Yellowstone. You?
Yeah. And for me, Alaska. There's several in Alaska. I don't know exactly. I'm going to probably
like Denali. Denali,
So
probably.
you're talking, there's 17 national parks up in Alaska, I believe.
Yeah. So Alaska.
I haven't never been there. Yeah.
You guys haven't been to Alaska?
Nope.
No. I don't know how I did this. I convinced my wife I made the suggestion for our honeymoon. Hey, why don't we go on an Alaskan cruise? And she was all for it. So we went on an Alaskan cruise. Now we didn't spend, port to port, right? Like you're in each port, we explored each port, but we didn't get to go into interior Alaska or anything, but we both really enjoyed our time. I am currently putting in the works of my next trip to Alaska, which probably won't be for another at least 15 years because it'll be a hunting trip for moose and multi-weeks and, a couple tens of thousands of dollars to do. So I have to save up for it. But that's how awesome it was up there. Seeing what they had, that was great. My big thing, I want to go to Yosemite. That's been, I got into photography when I was in college, taking some classes, and Ansel Adams was one of my favorites, and he spent a lot of time there. I've read a lot of, works by John Muir. Obviously he spent a lot of time there. So to go out there and see, the trees and see the falls and everything, that would be incredible for me. So if I'm going to plan this trip, right, like let's go with driving. Let's say we're going to drive, because more than likely I'm going to drive. The airline industry is crazy right now, right? So let's say we're going to drive. If I'm planning this visit, like what are some things that I want to think about in order to make it a successful trip?
So for us, we have a truck. We have a Honda Ridgeline that has the removable cover on the back that folds up. And the way we compartmentalized things and kept things easy to get to was we went and got some plastic tubs that fit the bed pretty tightly, because, when you're going across some dirt roads, you're going to pick up some dust. And so we compartmentalized food and extra clothing. And one thing I think we should have done more of was You get into some areas where it may be summer where you're from, like we're from Illinois, but when you drive out west, you're hitting spring all the way across the country to the West Coast. And I think we didn't have enough cold gear. So I would say probably food and cold gear are some things that you think you can go to a store, or you think you can stop by a gas station, and you get in certain areas and you're off grid, you're hungry and you're cold and you're hanging out in the car, or you're hanging out in the truck because you can't find a hotel room because everything's booked up in the next city over. So food and clothing.
Yeah. And for me, I would just say to tag on to that, a good segue is be aware of the time of year that you're going. So what the weather conditions are going to be, where you're going to be, both in elevation and if you're going in northern areas, you want to make sure that you're prepared for the cold that you may have.
So in South Dakota, it could be sunny and 60 degrees. And in the afternoon, it could be snowing 3 inches.
Yeah.
And it can come on you that quickly. So it kind of sounds like a big Hollywood movie where you're out in the middle of nowhere and the snowstorm comes and snows you in. That can happen.
Yeah. My dad and I went, this was a couple years ago now. We went to North Dakota for a pheasant hunt. We left the day after Christmas, and we were checking the weather the whole way out because we knew weather, we had been told, and we knew weather can turn on a dime in the Dakotas. And I remember we slept at a rest stop for a couple hours in Wisconsin, I think it was, or maybe Minnesota. Can't remember exactly, but we even checked the weather. When we got up, I put in air quotes there, whenever we decided to start driving again at 6 a.m., we're looking at the weather and we're like, yeah, okay, it's saying that they're going to get a couple inches, a couple inches, no big deal. We pulled into the hotel, the motel, and the first thing the lady asked us was, do you need to go buy food? And we were like, no, we brought all the food we're going to need because we were only going to be there for 4 days. And she goes, okay, good. And my dad's like, well, wait, why? Is it a family run business that's closing, or what's, she's like, oh no, we're getting a blizzard. We're like, no. So in the time it took us to drive, from roughly Minnesota or Wisconsin, somewhere around that border, the weather changed drastically. We ended up hightailing it out, which was a good thing because my friend who lives in North Dakota sent me a picture the next morning, and they already had 12 inches of snow, and it ended up 23 inches of snow. So we thought about staying maybe and riding it out, but it was we wouldn't have been able to hunt. We wouldn't have been able to do anything. We just sat in the hotel room. So
can't do anything.
Yeah. So, that just, my story is just to highlight, in the northern sort of tier of the lower 48, right? Especially spring, summer, or I'm sorry, spring and fall, yes, those weather changes can happen super, super quick. And so I agree, you need to be prepared with that 100%. You mentioned the hotel rooms being booked up in the next town over and things like that. Is that, if you're planning to stay in a hotel, is that something you need to book pretty far in the future then?
You can, but I think the way we did it on the trip a couple of years ago was we tried to be as malleable as possible, so that if, let's say, a park was super busy or the weather was not conducive to going on a hike or something, we would quickly pivot. So we would use what was the app that you used?
Road Tripper.
Cool app, so it would plan out the trip in advance. But there were a couple of times where we thought we'll just be able to get a hotel in Montana, and we're doing diamond mine, or not diamond mining, it was sapphire mining. And we got so excited about doing it, we were finding so many that we for that night we had not planned on a hotel, so we ended up just going into town, wanting to get a hotel, but there was a basketball convention, and so there were no rooms, so we had to drive for 2 hours. And we considered sleeping on the side of the road, but we didn't feel super safe about it. So yeah, and it's a little crazy. So if you can get a hotel ahead of time, that's great. But if you're trying to be malleable and you like go with the flow, there's going to be some situations where you might have to like just camp it out in your vehicle.
And you want to make sure that you're determining what if you're in a peak season, may not be the best idea to do that, because depending on which parks you go to, there's, let's say, the top 10 popular parks. If you're in and around those parks anywhere, you're probably not going to find a hotel. So you'd have to plan well in advance. And if you want to stay in the parks, those are even further out. Depending on the park, you could be looking at 6 months to a year or longer to be able to get those reservations.
Yeah, so we like to hang out at parks that are not quite as popular, because there's a little bit more peace and quiet, and you have more available to you as far as lodging. Does that answer the question? Okay.
Yeah, that does. And that, I guess, was sort of part of what I was thinking. Like, is there an advantage to going to a less popular park, as opposed to like Yosemite? Like, everyone knows about Yosemite, right? Like, that's like the big park, I feel like. But there are dozens and dozens of parks, right? So like, what's the advantage of going to these lesser known parks that maybe don't have as much infrastructure built within it?
So one park that comes to mind would be the Bristol Pinecone Forest in just outside of Bishop. You take a Looney Tunes type of road. You drive for about an hour. It's an hour. And you get to the top of this mountain area that has the oldest living trees in the United States and the world, right?
I think so.
And the world.
There's one there carbonated, like 4,500 years old.
Yeah. So there was like 5 people there.
There were not very many people.
So that's one instance. So you have the whole park to yourself and the rangers to yourself. And then we just went to one in New Mexico where it's the old Fort Union. And we had a private tour with the ranger. She was so excited to see people that she's like, let me get my hat, let me get my booklet, and I'll walk you around the whole complex and give you a private tour, because we were the only people there.
Yeah.
So there's advantages to it. You're not going to the most popular, but the most popular aren't always the best. Is that a way to say it without hurting somebody's feelings?
You definitely have a high volume of traffic going through some of these parks, especially in the summertime season. Zion and Smoky Mountain Parkway. And I mean, you can name like 10, 12 parks that have a huge amount of traffic. So when you go there, it's almost like you're at
Disney.
You're not waiting in line for things, but I mean, it is really busy, and you're not necessarily getting time alone to actually go and explore some of the trails.
Hear the birds. Just be alone with nature.
So you go to some of these national monuments and other historical sites that are off the beaten path a little bit and not quite as popular. They're really nice because you have the freedom to be able to go on those trails and actually hear nature around you and not deal with such.
It's your own park.
Yeah.
And
that's, back to what we would advise if we had any suggestions, always talk to the rangers.
The rangers know the tea. The rangers always know the tea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they can give you the background on the history and everything else.
So you mentioned a Looney Tunes road, and you mentioned, that you guys have a truck. Like, is that a requirement, or like, could someone go to most of these parks probably with like, their little sedan or car or minivan with low ground clearance?
Yeah, for sure. We took a truck because we didn't know what we were going to come across. And our motto on the trip was, if there's a back road, we're going to take it. We ended up at sand dunes outside of Idaho, and we just thought we'd just take a back road. And I don't think you could have done that in a minivan. So a truck would be required if you want to like have some options. But most of the parks are set up for minivans and just sedans, 2-wheel drive cars. But if you want to have a little bit more of an adventure and go off grid, a truck is required.
Yeah. Getting to the parks, there's no parks that I can think of here in the 48 states that you can't get to.
Right. There are some places, we have a nephew that is kind of a nomadic. Sometimes he lives in Oregon, sometimes Florida, sometimes Montana. He's all over the place. But when we meet up with him, he'll take us off grid to places you can't get to by car. So if you don't have a 4-wheel drive truck, you're not going to make it through the creek that you're driving through to get to this wherever we're going kind of property where bear hang out, you know?
So with that sort of off grid, let's say someone decides like, yeah, I'm going to do this off grid, like that could be a dangerous situation, right? Because there's probably not going to be cell service, to be able to get, even in a truck, there are people even in a truck that they get stuck, right? And you need help with that kind of stuff. Like, do you guys take extra stuff just to try to help in that kind of situation? Or is it sort of like I hope we make it?
Well, when we go to the really extreme places, we're usually with our nephew, Ryan, and he's so adept to just being out off the grid that we feel pretty safe with him. And he usually has things to keep us safe. And we usually take dogs with us.
Yeah.
But when we go kind of off grid, which would be like suburbanites version of off grid, we usually take extra gas because gas isn't always readily available, and snacks. And one thing I think we should take this year would be chains for the tires. We were just in Portland, and apparently Portland doesn't get snow a lot. So they're not really used to like managing that or driving on it. So we were driving on snow covered roads that had never seen a snowplow. So having chains would have been really nice and would have made us feel a lot safer.
Yeah, that makes sense. The having some extra gas, that is a great tip. I'm going to bring up the North Dakota story again. When we eventually got there, okay, and actually got the hunt, we actually hunted for a longer period of time. Second time we went in November. But when we got there, we went to check out some fields that I thought maybe we would hunt, and there was a road on the map. But when you looked at it, boy, it did not look like a road. I'm used to back roads and dirt roads and that kind of thing. But even for me, I was like, man, how is this on a map? And we didn't get stuck, but my Dodge Ram, it tried its best to get stuck when we were back there, to the point where when we were coming back to the motel from that field, we actually stopped at a hardware store and got a shovel. To be able to sort of dig ourselves out if something like that would be necessary. Shovel, and I think we also got a bag of sand as well, just to try to help us with some traction if necessary. We didn't have to use it, but it was one of those things like we didn't think about. Like, we're purposefully going places that are, and granted, it's North Dakota, mostly private land where we were going, but it's still like the roads that were there were purposely going on bad roads to get to places where wild animals are going to be. And why that didn't like stick in our head of like, oh yeah, you might get stuck. What are you going to do? That's definitely something that you need to consider if you're choosing to go to the, off the beaten trail, off the grid a little bit, try to get back in and see some different things. So
yeah, nature will surprise you. Don't think just because you're human and you live in a city that you can't die out there. You 100% can die out there.
I feel like every year, for someone like me that sees news stories about outdoorsmen and stuff like that, like every year, nature just convinces me more and more that we can't control it, right? And that if you are not over prepared, you're underprepared. And that's, I spend a lot of time outside. I spend a lot of time in the woods and things like that, but by no means am I living off the grid. I still live a modern lifestyle, right? So you need to be prepared for those situations. What about you mentioned food and snacks and stuff? I mean, are you like, if you go for 5 weeks, you can't take all the food that you're going to eat. Plus, I'm sure part of the experience is eating locally as well. But like, what kind of snacks, what kinds of things are you taking that are easily transportable and easy to just sort of have without, just being nothing but complete junk food, even though I love junk food so much?
Yeah. So nature has its own packaging, and we tried to rely on that as much as possible. So bananas, apples, of course, granola bars. We did a lot of cheese and crackers. I think me personally, I lost 10 pounds on this trip because there wasn't access to food a lot of the time. So you were just eating cheese and crackers, driving back home to your, like say a campground or a hotel or something like that in the middle of the night. So it was kind of a wild trip in that we were learning as we were doing it. So when we came back, we're like, wow, that did not go at all like we planned. And the way we planned it was we were going to take our cooler, fill it with food and sandwiches. But after like the third day, peanut butter and jelly sandwich is just like really not doing it for me. So we got to find a Chipotle, and we got to find it fast, because eating the same thing over and over and over, for me, I can't do it. So we tried to make the best of the traditional cooler. You know, like when you're a kid, your parents pack the cooler so that you don't have to stop and spend a lot of money on food. But we did try to find niche areas where people had, like in Idaho, we made sure we stopped at this place that served Idaho fries so that we could experience what that state had to offer. That sounds kind of weird, but that's how
I'm right there with you. Like,
okay.
if I go on vacation to the beach or something, I don't want to go to Bubba Gump Shrimp Company. I want to go. I want to talk to the locals. Like, where do you go to eat? I want the local flavor of that area.
Yeah. And if you ask people, you just are kind and just open and vulnerable and say, we're on this trip, we don't know what we're doing. It once you're vulnerable, people will open back up to you and they'll say, have you tried this? Have you gone here? Here's an experience we had last year. And so we're like, oh, we're going to be going by there. We'll stop at that coffee shop because of X, or we'll swing by that like farmers market that only goes on at certain times of year. So we tried to let nature show us what to do. We tried to not have a strong schedule. And for the most part, we try not to, because I think that's the adventurous part of the trip. It's kind of like when you're a kid and you're in the back seat of the station wagon, your parents have the trip all planned out. But for you, it's like, what's going to happen next? And so we tried to bring a little bit of that back into it. So you want to pack things that, back to the food question, that are nutrient dense, things you're not going to get bored of, and definitely pack a lot to drink, because it gets really hot. And we didn't realize that when you're not sweating, you're still dehydrating yourself.
Yeah, especially
like,
if you're
hot. We're not sweating.
Especially if you're at higher elevations, right? Because the air's not as humid. I feel like that's something that a lot of people don't realize, you know, that at higher elevations, you're losing more moisture out of your body than you would think, because you're not sweating, and there's not the moisture in the air to replace that as you breathe it in. So you need that extra water to stay hydrated.
Yep, we learned a lot, and we're actually surprised we came back alive.
So that's a good jumping off point of like, what was the biggest mistake? Like, what's the biggest mistake you've made when you've gone to, whether it was on that 5-week trip or just like in general going to a national park? What's that like big mistake that you can be like, I'm never doing that again?
I think if you don't do your research on where you're going, it's possible that you get kind of let down. So it's like that moment on, it's not Christmas Vacation. It's the one with, what's his name? Where he's all excited about going to the theme park, and he pulls up and it's closed. Do your research ahead of time. Know where you're going, know what you're going to get into. Do know that mosquitoes will hunt you and tap on your car window. So literally, I'm not joking. Like, I remember this one just like tapping on the window while I ran to the truck, sat in the driver's seat, and it was just kept tapping on the window. So I think the biggest mistake for us would be not taking bear spray, not taking mosquito spray, and just assuming that we would just be okay. You?
Yeah, and just being prepared. I mean, like I said, check in with the rangers, check in with people, see what it is that have been there before, to see what it is, because I've heard someone told me not too long ago, oh, I checked the weather at Denver, it should be fine. I'm like, yeah, but you're going up another, 4,000 feet in elevation up into the mountains. It's not the same weather conditions.
Maybe go with somebody who knows the area for the first time, so you get that shared knowledge. So you're not learning these things and possibly getting hurt on your first trip.
You mentioned not bringing bear spray. Was that because you had an encounter with the bear, or just because after the fact you're like, oh, we probably should have had bear spray?
We had a couple encounters with bears. I think I'm a mother of two, so I know fear. I don't think I've ever been so scared where I literally can't move. So we were in Glacier, and there was a lost child, and so everybody was on the trail trying to find this child, and all of a sudden we heard somebody yelling at us, and we kind of just froze, and we're like, bear? What do you mean bear? And so we went like this, and we looked over here, and just like in the movies, it was a grizzly bear, and it was like what, 20?
It seemed like 20 feet. It was probably more like 40 or 50 feet away, but that's still relatively close.
Yeah, that's a little too close for
off.
comfort. Yeah.
Yeah, it was walking beside the trail off into the woods, and they're like scream and yell. They're like yelling at us to scream and yell, and we're like, "What are you talking about?" They're like, "Bear, make noise," and we're like, it's that awkward moment where you're like, you're clapping lightly, looking around, like, are we being punked?
It's nature. Don't we want to be quiet? Yeah. So that was the first one, and then the second one, we were off grid with our nephew Ryan, like I talked about before, and he took my husband up into this meadow, which is like something off of again a Hollywood movie with beautiful flowers. And they were walking back, and all of a sudden the ground kind of moved a little bit, and he turned around, and my nephew had his face in his face, and he's like, "Did you hear that? That's a bear. I'm going to pick up this rock. You pick up some sticks, you start hacking those together, and we're just going to start walking back down to the camp where the dogs are, the dogs that can save our lives." And I'm like, oh my gosh. So my husband looks at my nephew, and he looks down at his feet, and he's in flip-flops. And Ryan's like, I know. All you have to do is outrun me. So we've had a couple bear instances. And so again, it's that situation where you don't know what you're getting into unless you're with somebody who knows the land. So we've had a couple close calls that we feel kind of silly about.
Yeah, I grew up in bear country, but in Pennsylvania here, that means black bears. And when it comes to black bears are way more scared of people than people should be of the black bears. They're not the kind of bear that's going to come and attack you. Very rare instances. Really, the only time I have been scared around the black bear was archery hunting in a tree where I had cubs on one side of the tree and the sow behind me. All she did was let out a growl, and the cubs came running to her, and then they went off. But knowing that you shouldn't be in between cubs and a sow, like that made me very nervous. But I've heard from people that, are in grizzly bear country that not only is it important to have bear spray, but also have it in an area like on you in an area that you can get it out and utilize it quickly. And when I say that, I'm mentioning like hunters that will go, elk hunting, mule deer hunting. They have their bear spray, but it's like buried in the bottom of their pack. Like at that point, you might as well not even have it. As I've come to learn. I would have been the same way, but having it not just with you, but like actually accessible, being able to use it, look at the can, and like, how do I actually, pull the pin and squeeze the trigger and know how to use it, things of that nature.
Yeah, that first instance when we were up in Glacier, when they were yelling at us about the bear, I think that was the one where I felt like it was Don Knotts all of a sudden.
You couldn't
I couldn't get the bear out of the sleeve that it was in. It was out, it was there, but I just couldn't get it out of the harness that it was in. And I'm like, you just get all panicked. Yeah.
And listen, that close, like I can fully understand why you would be, panicked and nervous and fumble with something that you're not used to using. That makes complete sense. So we've been talking about public lands and some tips and things like that. You have developed a brand that revolves around giving back to public lands and being a part of the public lands. Why is it important to give back to public lands?
We were on the Jody Mayberry show a couple of years ago, and Jody's a Peoria native here from Peoria, Illinois, but he moved out west to become a park ranger And he also has a podcast that helps park rangers. And our son, who's also a co-founder who couldn't be here today, he kind of said it poignantly. Jody asked him, what do the national parks mean to you? And he said, these are lands that will always remain as they were, and no one's going to spoil them. So every generation will see the same type of landscape that you're seeing right now. So for us, having that for our children and possibly grandchildren or other people's grandchildren or future generation is really important. And I know we're small. We're not a huge brand yet, but I feel like if everybody does a little, it makes a huge impact.
How old's your son to be able to be so succinct?
Brent is 25.
Okay.
He loves nature. He loves
Okay.
nature. Going on this trip, I think, was life-changing for him. We just, one day we're like, we're getting in the truck and we're going for 5 weeks to national parks. And he's like, wait, what? And I think it just really helped him see how important these lands are, because if you have a bad day or you have, like, you're going through some tough times and you walk out into nature, wow, it's an instant reset and it's free.
Yeah, that's well said. There's been a lot of research surrounding the pandemic and the importance that being outside and within nature can be so beneficial to your mental health. You know, I think about myself. I'm 37. It wasn't really until I turned like 32-ish that I started like realizing just how much the outdoors meant to me. You know, I've always gone out, but like there's still that realization that you get. Eventually, hopefully, everyone sort of gets like when that realization hit me. It was after I got married, and because my wife and I had plans from the beginning of having kids, you know, and so like thinking, like seeing development happening here in Western Pennsylvania, like, okay, I remember those used to be woods, you know, this gas station that's here, I have a picture of my great grandfather standing there with, you know, rooster tails out of his hunting pack, because that used to be cattails in a wetland. And now, you know, I've never known it to be that. And then once I had my son, it was like really hammered home of like, I say you as in me, like I need to do something to ensure that he can see places like I was able to see them. And like you said, if I'm lucky enough to be a grandfather someday, like that my grandkids, future grandkids would be able to see some of those places similar to how I saw them. That's, you know, that's become super important to me. For him to be able to make that connection at 25, I definitely wasn't even thinking about like kids and future. I was thinking about like, what do I need to do to have a good time this weekend, which oftentimes is going to camp. But like, you know, I was thinking about myself. For him to be able to think about, you know, future generations at a young age, that is super impressive to me.
Yeah, we call him the old soul or the analog man, because every time I see him, he reminds me of my grandfather reincarnated. He's just really a simple soul who just really believes in living a simple life and loving the land and just fixing things so that you don't throw them away.
You know, you mentioned that you're a small brand, and I don't want to discount that, because sometimes small brands can have very large impacts. So let's talk about some of those impacts that that your brand is having. What is it that your brand, tell us about your brand, and then what is it about it that has that sort of eco impact?
Wild Rooted is a brand we created in early 2019 to remind people of the way that a lot of us grew up in the woods and maybe being money poor, but being very nature rich. We, as older folks, kind of see maybe younger folks and older folks seeing screens a lot, and maybe screens, while they do a lot of good, I think you have to have some balance. So we wanted some way to give back to the national parks, and we wanted some way to just enrich people's lives with something on social media that is constantly nature and constantly supportive and empowering. And so the brand started pretty organically in that we just started with a couple stickers that I tried to remember that 5-week trip to the national parks, and we saw so much. I had to draw it. So I drew like 5 different, like I drew a tree and I filled inside what I experienced. And then I drew an owl and I drew inside what I experienced. And so we just made some stickers to give out to people. And before you knew it, people were like, these are great. And then we started doing t-shirts, and it just kept growing and growing. And so we just really want to put some good out into the world, and we want to do it sustainably. And there are a couple really cool companies like Living Ink Technology. Scott Fulbright, he is the founder of Living Ink, and he makes carbon negative algae ink, which we use on, like this t-shirt is printed with algae ink. So this shirt is 100% cotton printed with algae ink, as opposed to a lot of shirts are printed with plastisol. So we're really trying to move towards something that doesn't harm nature. We want to give back to nature, but we also don't want to harm nature. And then we're working with Natural Fiber Welding here in Peoria, and they make a couple of products. Right now we're working with their MIRUM product. It is a leather looking leather replacement.
It's a leather alternative.
But yeah, so it's made completely of plants, rubber, essential oils, and actually agricultural waste, which is very bountiful here. And being a converter for natural fiber welding has been kind of a big deal for us, because we're able to make things like key tags that are laser etched, so they're completely eco-friendly, patches on caps. We're working on some other things, but basically being able to make a product that supports the national park, that doesn't hurt nature. I think we're really doing what we set out to do. We're just doing it a little bit differently than what we thought.
That's
a little bit at a time. Can't be a perfect solution right out the
Yeah,
gate.
little steps.
Yeah, that's really cool to that. Not only are you trying to give back to national parks, right, with profits that you bring in, things like that, but then also like you said, not harming nature in order to do that, by using algae ink. Like you mentioned before we started recording that like this patch you can throw it on the ground and it's just going to turn into soil, right? Like it's not going to be anything harmful for the environment. And I think that is in and of itself is super cool in this unfortunate time in the world, in our society, where we're this fast fashion, right, where it's super cheap clothing, styles are changing sometimes weekly, let alone seasonally and yearly, and it's just like this constant subconscious, if not totally overt, push to just keep like updating and buying new clothes, that whenever you get rid of them, if you donate them, great. But if a lot of this fast fashion, like it rips, it doesn't hold up well to multiple washings, things like that, so you end up throwing it away, and then it's sitting in a landfill and it isn't biodegradable. It's just going to be there literally forever. So the idea that you can buy a t-shirt that you wear over and over and over again because it's become your now favorite t-shirt, and it has holes in it, and it's like, I can't donate it, I can't wear this anymore. Maybe your wife doesn't like you wearing that holy t-shirt out to family gatherings.
That's awfully precise.
Type thing. No, she's great. But I will say I have some favorite shirts that I should throw away, but I just can't bring myself to do it. But to
just patch them
to know
with the nose patch.
to know that like if I did throw a t-shirt like this away, that really I don't even have to throw it away. Like I could bury it in my garden, right? And it's not gonna harm any of the vegetables that I'm growing or anything like that. Like that is such a cool concept to me. And I hope that this is just the tip of the iceberg. And I hope that more brands and more clothing options get put out there that have this sustainable and not harmful aspect to clothing.
Yeah. So if anybody's interested in switching their t-shirts to being printed with algae ink, just check with your local screen printer. They can buy the ink for you. It is an organic type matter, so you do have to refrigerate it, I believe. But it's super soft, so when you wear the t-shirt to bed, you don't have that plasticky feel on your shirt. So it's kind of cool. It's kind of rad, actually.
Yeah, I handmade some shirts last year in the summer for uh the the Keystone Elk Country Alliance Elk Expo. And it used basically like a sticker that it was a heat press, think Cricut machine type thing, right?
Yeah.
And it was just this big square of my logo, and it was great, like for what I'm doing, just to be here. And it was like 90 degrees and sunny all weekend, and I was sweating anytime that my back was in the sun because it just traps all the heat. Like it's not,
Oh, I didn't think about that.
yeah, it just trapped all the heat. The green was a little bit darker color, so it attracted that sunlight, and it's like, okay, this was a bad idea. Like I'm sweating profusely as I'm trying to talk to people, and it's like this was a bad idea. I need to come up with a better option for a t-shirt because this isn't going to make anyone happy.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. So not only would it be more beneficial to the environment, but it's also going to help you feel a little bit better as you're wearing it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So how you two and your son you were able to take something that you love and find a way to help nature, help humans. Like, how do you do that?
Well, I'm an eco-friendly packaging designer by day, so that helps fund things. We're both self-employed, and then John does e-commerce web development and illustration. So I don't think we could be able to give as much back to the parks as we have if we didn't have these day jobs. But these day jobs mean that everything we would hire somebody to do the brand, we can do ourselves because it's what we do every day. So it allows us to give more back to the national parks.
Yeah. So it's just basically like, what are you already good at? Right. And then how can you leverage that into helping? I'm a teacher, by career. And so I talk all day. Right. So how can I leverage what I'm doing to benefit, in this case, conservation? And for me, it was like, well, I'm just going to keep talking. I'm going to talk about it to as many people as possible. And, that's what I try to talk to my students about. And I'm sure they're probably sick of hearing that. Like, everyone is good at something. Find what you're good at, and then find what you're passionate about, and marry those two together. Will it make you rich? Not necessarily. It could, but not necessarily. But what it will do is it'll give you that sense of satisfaction that you're using your talents to help a cause or something you're passionate about, succeed in some way or another. So I want to applaud, you two and your son for being able to take what you feel passionately about and take what you're able to do, what you're talented at, and marrying those two together. I really feel like if we had more people like that, there would be a lot more good going on in the world, and less greed, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And big shout out to, if you do want to marry your passion to doing good, be sure to tap into your local small business organizations. Most states have free resources for you, so you don't have to do it all yourself. So here in Greater Peoria, we have a place called Distillery Labs, where we can seek counsel of people who may know things that we don't know. And so we're not learning it all ourselves. So don't try to do it all yourselves. Reach out to your community and to your local economic development. They're there to help you grow.
Yeah. Small Business Development Center too.
Yeah.
So if someone's interested, someone's listening, they're like, I want to check out this company. I want to check out, their brand, their apparel, what they're producing. It seems really cool to me. Where can they go to purchase?
Yeah, so that's pretty easy. Wildrooted.com. And then on any social channel, it's just Wildrooted. So WILDROUTED.com. And anytime you see an owl in one of our designs, that's a tribute to my grandpa that I grew up next to on a homestead. He taught us how to farm the land and take care of it, and taught us how to fix things instead of throwing them away. So that's our tribute to him.
That's really cool. Those little personal touches are oftentimes
Yeah.
what make things
Thank
so much better. So for everyone listening, the links to their social media profiles, to their website, all going to be down in the episode notes. If you're driving, don't grab a pen and paper, right? That's dangerous. Just wait till you get to the next red light, and then you can go ahead and click that link, and it'll take you right to where you want to go. Diana, John, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate this. Before we go though, where is the next national park you're going to go to?
We
all
don't.
of them.
We don't have one.
Can we have
planned.
all of them, please?
we just got back from the Public Land Alliance conference out in Portland, and so we're kind of gathering our thoughts from that and reaching out. We're hoping to get into some of the national parks here soon.
I'm guessing it's going to be in the Washington State area, would be my guess. We haven't tapped into that yet.
I was curious to see if you both like rattled off a different place and then have like a debate live.
It's a constant argument
of
Don't start.
who's going to win that one. I
will win.
All right. Well, again, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it, and good luck on your next adventure.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. We appreciate you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
And that will do it for today's episode. Thank you for listening. A big thank you to Diana and John for coming on and talking about not just their trip and the tips and everything, which all that stuff was great information, but also talking about how they've been inspired to give back to nature in a way that works best for them. And I think that is really the key takeaway from all of this, is that if you enjoy nature, we have to find ways to give back to it, because if we don't, as we see and have seen, humans just take over ecosystems and tend to destroy them if we just take them over, and develop in an unfettered way. So if if you enjoy being out in nature, you enjoy going to national parks, like, we need to give back because unfortunately it's not top priority financially. Conservation's not a top priority financially. So we have to find ways to give back. And they've done that with their company. They've taken their unique skills and they've figured out a way to be able to create a company that also gives back. I have taken my unique skills and put them into this podcast of, I'm a talker, and I like talking to people. Let's highlight things going on in conservation. Going back real quick to the tips and some of the things that they mentioned, for anyone that's maybe visited some national parks and been around, those tips might have been like low level for you, maybe like, oh yeah, of course. If you're someone that's like a avid backpacker, or you've done DIY hunting trips, some of you are like, oh yeah, okay, no big deal. That's pretty easy stuff. Things that I would have known. But, for someone that doesn't necessarily, maybe they're planning their first trip, or just even like little things of just like making sure you have food, like realizing that, if you don't book certain amount of time in advance, like, it's going to be very hard to find hotels in that general area, having 4-wheel drive, to be able to see, those sort of deep spots that other people don't see, like, in order to get to those places, sometimes it's going to be a lot of work. But what I have found, when I'm hunting in particular, when I do that little bit of extra work to get to a spot that other people might not normally go to because it is that extra work, I tend to enjoy those moments more, and it sure sounds like Diana and John are finding those spots and enjoying them more because they've put in that little bit of extra work. So this was a big, long episode. If you stick around to the end, after this is done, my little outro here is done, you're going to hear an ad, and you're going to hear an ad for the Wild Rooted Company. And that's because we have partnered with Wild Rooted. They're doing great work. So we partnered with them. So in that ad and in the episode details at the bottom, we actually have like a little free discount code for you if you go to Wild Routed. So listen to that ad, see what's available there. Check out their website, definitely, and you'll find some really, really cool products and that are eco-conscious, which is even better. Make sure you take some time to click that link and go to wildrooted.com and listen to the ad for the discount code that you are going to hear and you can enter at checkout. Until next time, get outside, take someone with you, and as always, stay wild. Just like you, I've been on a search for ways to tell the world I'm passionate about the outdoors. Things like a beautifully designed sticker, a well-fitting hat, or a comfortable shirt, all while working to help the outdoor community. Well, I think I finally found a company who checks all the boxes. Wild Rooted is an eco-conscious, family-owned company with a wide range of products, from stickers to shirts printed with algae ink, and hat patches, key fob holders, and keychains made with a plant-based leather alternative called MIRUM. They have an inspirationally designed product for you. Not only that, but 10% of all profits are donated to our wonderful national parks and forests. It doesn't get any better than that. Head over to wildrooted.com and use CU Free Ship 23 at checkout to get your gear. That's CU FREE SHIP 23 at wildrooted.com. Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters. And here's how it works. It lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. You can even take conversations with your fans to the next level with Q&A and polls.